Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring today's Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
To see that there is deliberate movement in his eyes to make something happen on that computer screen. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, I really was not sure that it was going to work. And shame on me for not having more faith in Daniel. But to sit there and watch him activate that computer and it not being a random act, but something that he was intentionally doing was just absolutely incredible. And of course, you know, the tears again, the tears are going of joy and happiness and excitement.
That's our guest, Jeff Johnson. Jeff and his wife, Michelle, are parents to two boys, one of whom, Daniel, has hydrocephalus and encephalocele and is unable to walk or talk. We'll hear the Johnson family story and about how a new computer gives the family new hope. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello to David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's hear this conversation between David Hirsch and Jeff Johnson.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Jeff Johnson of Anderson, South Carolina, who's the father of two and a meat cutter. Jeff, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
You and your wife, Michelle, have been married for 27 years and are the proud parents of two sons, Michael, 26, and brother Daniel, who's 22, who has hydrocephalus and encephalocele, if that's how you pronounce it.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Encephalocele. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Well, I grew up in a small town, Elgin, Illinois, which is just about 35 miles west of Chicago. Family of three. I have two younger siblings. Mark is my youngest brother, and then Amy is my sister. She's the youngest of the three.
Excellent. So, out of curiosity, is your dad still alive?
He is. Actually, both my parents are still alive, same age, born on the same day, both 82 years old. My father loves to remind my mother that he's about 6 hours younger than she is. So kind of an interesting fact.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that qualifies her as a cougar. There's a running joke in our marriage as well. My wife's about 7 or 8 months older than I am, so every once in a while I refer to her as a cougar, just in good fun, though.
That's right.
So what does your dad do for a living?
My father is retired now, but he was an electronic engineer, very hardworking father, and also very dedicated to his family, my mother, and us as kids. So he was a great dad.
Excellent. And how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
I think it's great. You know, as I grew up, I knew that I wanted to raise a family and raise my children and do the things that my dad did with us, because my father and mother both were involved in all of the sports that my brother and I were involved in. My dad coached baseball teams. My mother was, of course, always in the bleachers and watching and screaming and yelling for us. But my father was very involved with all of the things that we did, extracurricular, and then was just a great father at home. So we're very close, and still to this day are very close. And I've always said if I could be the father, just half the father that he was to me, I would definitely feel like I was a success.
Okay. So let's talk about school and career a little bit. My recollection was you went to Larkin High School in Elgin and then Elgin Community College. And when you were in college, I think you mentioned that your primary or initial focus was on culinary. And I'm wondering, how did that transpire and where has your career taken you?
Well, I enjoyed. I actually in high school took a couple cooking classes, baking specifically, and so I enjoyed both baking and doing different types of cooking, and thought that I would like to go ahead and start into a culinary arts program at the community college. And of course, I wanted to be the best at what I did. So, the goal was to be the chef of a five-star restaurant. And like I said earlier, I wanted to raise a family very similar to the way my dad raised a family. And I found out very quickly, at least for myself, that to be the best at one thing was not going to allow me to be the best at the one thing that I wanted to be the best at. I enjoyed the time that I spent in that program, but kind of veered away from that. But then in my career, very early on, I went to work at a meat market in St. Charles, Illinois, and managed their seafood department. And that really got me hooked, I guess you could say. I've been with Public Supermarkets for going on 36 years, and I probably have been cutting meat or fish for probably about 40 years now. So still involved in food, and I love it to this day. So.
So let's switch and talk about special needs, first on a personal level and then beyond. So there were two diagnoses, one that was made in vitro, which was the encephalocele. I'm wondering, how did that diagnosis come about and what is that?
We had an ultrasound scheduled. The reason that we had that scheduled was my first son, Michael, was born with a facial cleft, which is very unusual. And that was something that we didn't realize, of course, until he was born. And so after that happened, when Michelle got pregnant with Daniel, we just wanted to make sure that if there was something unexpectedly coming, that we may have a little bit better chance of finding that out. Well, they did the ultrasound, and the young lady, the tech doing the ultrasound, left the room suddenly and without saying anything to us, and came back with a doctor, and they proceeded to look at Michelle through the machine, and then left the room again. And at that point, of course, Michelle and I were a little concerned because they weren't sharing or communicating anything with us. And long story short, they came back in, we went into an office, and they explained to us that Daniel had been diagnosed with a neural tube defect, and that was encephalocele. And that's where the skull does not form completely. It can be at the top of the head, the back of the head, or the front of the head. And so this is what happened with Daniel, and his was an occipital encephalocele, so it was on the back of his head. And the area that was affected were, the primary functioning areas, the breathing, the swallowing, all of the things that, of course, are necessary for a child to live. So the diagnosis was not good, and the expectations of him living were not good also.
It sounds like it was an overwhelming experience. You already have a son who's a few years older, and you're going through this traumatic experience. And I'm wondering, what was your first reaction, or how did you and Michelle deal with that?
Well, it was difficult. It was difficult. I think the tears, started to flow immediately. I know Michelle was very emotional immediately as we sat in the doctor's office. And we were probably overwhelmed and in shock and didn't really know what to say or do at that point. They encouraged, that we terminate the pregnancy. There wasn't a pressure to do that. I think as we found out over the years, that's something that doctors, they have to recommend, all the options that are available. And I think with the diagnosis, that's really what they were recommending that we do. But, as we left and we, going back now 22 years, we got on the internet, and all that we could find on any search on encephalocele and that diagnosis were, these grotesque pictures of dead babies and babies that had been born and had not been diagnosed, so their heads were, in terrible shape, and just a lot of bad information. Nothing about support groups, nothing about success stories, where children had survived. And so that was really all that we saw, was a lot of negative. And at the same time, in our hearts, we're thinking, we need to have this baby. We believe that God has a purpose for every life. I know that was the overwhelming influence on what our decision was, but to share that story that I did with you once before, our store manager at that time gave us 3 days to just kind of get our thoughts together and try to make a decision on what we were going to do. As far as Daniel was concerned, we took those 3 days, and that third day we ended up at a forest reserve park up in Clemson, South Carolina. Beautiful park on the lake, and we sat at a picnic table, and really not a lot of conversation, other than I think that husband and wife conversation where there's really no words, but there was a whole lot being said. We finally kind of looked at each other and we said, why are we doing this? We don't need 3 days. We don't need to think about what we're going to do, because we know that we're going to have Daniel. We're going to take care of him no matter what happens, whether it's 1 day or 1 week or 1 year. We're going to give him the best life that we can give him. And that's what we decided to do.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. It sounds like it was very emotional. I can hear it in your voice, and it's 22 years later. And it's very powerful, and it's a testimony to your faith and Michelle's faith, for that matter. So I recall you mentioning that Daniel's had a lot of procedures. I don't know how many, including 5 cranial expansions. And I'm wondering if you could expound on that.
Sure. We really stopped counting surgical procedures after 100.
Oh my.
And we probably are into probably well over 150 procedures. But the cranial expansion, Daniel's skull hardened, and the fontanelle or the soft spot hardened very quickly. And then there was some thickening in Daniel's skull, which caused pressure on Daniel's brain, along with the fact that he had hydrocephalus. So he had fluid in the ventricles of his brain, and then his skull was not allowing for his brain to grow at all. And so what the doctors did was this cranial expansion, and they would make an incision from ear to ear over the top of his head, and then they would remove about 1/3 of the top of his skull, and they would basically rebuild the skull on the table in the operating room. They would cut the piece of skull into strips, and they would lay it out on the table, and then they would spread those strips out just a little bit each piece, and then they would put the strips back together with straps of titanium, and they would screw them together. And then they would put this newly formed, larger skull bone back on Daniel's head. And then they would go ahead and close everything back up again. And so they did that 5 times.
Wow, it sounds quite involved. And at such a young age, right? He's having these procedures done as he's growing. It seems like a lot to take in.
Yeah, that's right.
The fact that you've had 100 or approaching 150 procedures, holy cow, just seems like a roller coaster of a ride that your family has been on, and Daniel in particular. So he's 22 years old. From what I remember you telling me, he's nonverbal. He has profound intellectual delays. He communicates mostly through his eyes and the use of his right hand and index finger. And I'm wondering, how is it that you communicate? How is it that he communicates with others, for that matter?
Well, David, from the time that he was a baby, Michelle and I have always talked to Daniel as if he was a typical baby. And I think, part of that influence was one of Daniel's occupational therapists. Her name is Kathy Stiles. She started to see Daniel at 3 months old, but, she said, we have no idea what Daniel can do or what he can't do. And so we're not going to limit him in the way that we treat him and work with him. And so I think that maybe even much more from that point, we talked to Daniel as if he could hear us, as if he could understand us. And just in case he did, then we were ahead of the game. As far as the way Daniel communicates, I guess it's hard to explain that he communicates with his eyes, but Michelle and I can look at him and we can tell, whether he feels good, whether he feels bad, whether he is alert and listening to us, or whether he is zoning out because of his diagnosis. He can shut down when there's too much going on. And I think Daniel, over the years, he did that. And so we could read a lot through his eyes. And of course, he makes some groaning noises and some grunting noises that kind of correspond with either feeling good or not feeling good.
So I'm sort of curious to know if there's been much of an impact on Michael, your older son, or the rest of your family, or what impact has Daniel's situation had on Michael and the rest of your family?
Well, Michael is my oldest and just got married. He has just finished his first year of PT school. And Michelle and I believe, and, Michael has alluded to the fact that one of the reasons that he decided he wanted to be a physical therapist is because of his experiences with Daniel. Michael actually would go, he would go to the school with us, of course, to pick Daniel up, to take him and to pick him up. I guess you could call him the jungle gym, because as soon as he went into those classes, the kids just mobbed him. And it was just nonstop the whole time we were there. And Michael absolutely loved it. He loved the kids. He loved the interaction. And so I think at a very young age, Michael's heart was touched. And I think the result now is what you see is an incredible young man with empathy for the parent and for the child, because he's experienced it all. He loves his little brother incredibly. We see it every day, and I watched him. He just left 2 days ago. And he said goodbye to Daniel. And then he leaned down and kissed Daniel on the hand and just rubbed his head and said goodbye. And that's the norm. When Michael was home, he spoke to Daniel every day. He touched Daniel every day. He loved him on Daniel every day. That's the kind of special son that I have.
Yeah, well, it's remarkable that these boys are so close, and it's a testimony to your parenting. And like you'd said, he's been touched. His heart's been touched by his brother. And, perhaps it's, turned into a calling, right? He's at the beginning of his career. becoming a physical therapist. And, nobody knows. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So thank you for sharing. So I'm thinking about supporting organizations that either Daniel's benefited by directly or organizations that your family has benefited from. And I know that you mentioned Kathy Stiles, from a very young age, Daniel's young age, has been involved. And I'm wondering if there's any other individuals or organizations, for that matter, that have played an important role over the last 22 years.
Yes. The first group that we had is a nonprofit. It's called Family Connection. And it's a nonprofit that is really out there to help families to connect to services that families don't know about. There's so much that happens, when a baby is born, and so many things going through a parent's head. And it's nice to have somebody that can sit down with you and say, hey, there's this service out there and that service out there, and they can help you with this and help you with that, because you have so many questions in your mind that you have no answers to. This particular group, Family Connection, helps connect to services and then also is emotional support. Sherry Fuller called Michelle not too long after Daniel was born. She was a support parent at that time, so she offered to be a support parent to us. And after a period of time that Michelle really felt like we didn't need a support parent, that we were going to, I guess, try to go it on our own, Michelle made that call to Sherry, and that phone call turned into a 17-year career for my wife, Michelle, because Michelle, shortly after she met Sherry, actually became an employee for Family Connection and did the same thing. She became a support parent. So that particular group was very instrumental in helping us just get focused on the right things for Daniel, to find the right services for him, and to do the best we could do for him. They were great. And then I think Michelle, she did a fantastic job. She was wonderful with her families and was very supportive. And we became all involved as a family with these families. And so it was really a neat thing, I think, for all of us. So that was at a younger age. And then Ainsley's Angels, also a nonprofit. It's a group that was started by Kim Rooster Rossiter. He had a child who diagnosis, I think, probably not anywhere near the same as Daniel, but our kids were very similar in what they could do and what they couldn't do. It was suggested to him years ago by a therapist, hey, Kim, you run, why don't you take Ainsley out with you when you run? That was the beginning of an incredible movement and an incredible organization. And we have been blessed to become involved with them. Kim helped us early on to get a chair for Daniel. And so we run. We are not runners. Michelle and I are not runners by any stretch of the imagination, but we have become runners for Daniel. And so Daniel has a racing wheelchair that we push him in. And Daniel loves to be outside. He loves the stimulation that we feel, a wind, a change in temp. And that's one of those things when we talked about noises that he makes or his communication. Michelle and I find that if we're not moving fast enough, he lets us know by making some not so sweet sounds. We're doing that. I want to say we're probably in about our 6th year of running with them, and we just have become an ambassador for the upstate of South Carolina. We invite children or adults in our community to come out and ride in our chairs, and then we invite runners to come and push our kids and push our adults. And it's an incredible way to include special people in our family in things that we do that they can't do with us unless we give them some assistance. It's very special to us. The children that ride in our chairs absolutely love it. Ainsley's Angels has been an incredible group to be involved with, and Daniel absolutely loves that. So
I met Rooster Rossiter a couple, 3 years ago and was immediately taken by his passion for the work that you've just described, which brings people that are able-bodied and able to run and push those that might not otherwise be able to participate in these running events, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, marathons, in some cases, some triathlons. And I've only done that twice. Once in the Napa Valley Marathon with a 29-year-old woman who has cerebral palsy. And then again, in January of 2020, I had the opportunity to push a 9-year-old in the Louisiana Marathon, half marathon, actually. And I have one of those pink racing chairs now in my garage. I'm all fired up about making better use of that this year, and then I'm hoping in years ahead, God willing. So thanks for sharing. I also remember you mentioning a company that I'm not familiar with, and I think it was Eye Gaze. And I'm wondering, what do they do and what connection do they have to the Johnson family?
Okay. You're talking to a computer illiterate person, so it's going to be very basic. Very basic. There are computers that have been designed, and I can't tell you when it started or who started it, but one of the names is an eye gaze computer. The idea is that the person using the computer is able to make that computer function by using their eyes and connecting to cameras that are looking back at the person. So Daniel, over the last couple months, has been kind of going through a trial period with a computer like that to see if that might be something that he can use to communicate to us. Right now, Daniel is just kind of playing games with it. There are certain games that are downloaded on the computer, but it's incredible to see, after going on 23 years now, to see that there is deliberate movement in his eyes to make something happen on that computer screen. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, I really was not sure that it was going to work, and shame on me for not having more faith in Daniel. But to sit there and watch him activate that computer and it not being a random act, but something that he was intentionally doing, was just absolutely incredible. And of course, you know, the tears again, the tears are going of joy and happiness and excitement for Daniel and therapists that have been working with Daniel for 20 years. The Kathy Stiles, who says, I knew he could do it. And the other therapists who just were so excited, calling late at night. Can I stop at the house and check on him and see how he's doing? So it's amazing. And like I said, I don't understand all of it, but I know that it's something that may help Daniel. And if nothing else, if it allows him to play electronic games that he enjoys doing, then it's a win-win.
Well, thanks for sharing. It sounds like it's something that's more recent. So maybe what we can do is follow up a year, a couple, 3 years down the road and take a look back and see what, if any, impact this has had. And, it sounds like it has a lot of potential.
Yep.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering what advice beyond what you've already described that you might be able to share with another dad who has a child, or in some cases, children with special needs.
Boy, have we got a couple more hours to talk? David, I think the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway is, and it's very easy to say, and it's very hard to do, but look for the things that your child can do and what your child's potential is, because our kids, we call them special for a reason, and our kids are warriors, and our kids have hearts that are so big that we can't even fathom what's going on. They want to do so much. Just like typical kids, they want to be successful and they want to do special things and they want to make mom and dad happy. And so if we limit that, we're limiting for the child the joy of something that that child could do, and we're limiting for the parent the joy of seeing what their child can do.
That's fabulous. Thank you. So if I could paraphrase what you've said, emphasize what your child can do as opposed to what they can't do, and don't put any limits on them, because you don't know. Only God knows what's possible. And if you had to err on the side of encouraging them to try things, even if it doesn't seem possible, visibly possible, that something could be accomplished. And if you don't try, you'll never know. I think that's one of the ideas that comes to mind. So I'm sort of curious to know, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
Well, I tried this many years ago. Like I said, my wife was involved with Family Connection. I guess one of the things that jumped out at me, among other things, was the divorce rate of parents who had children with special needs. I experienced, going to doctors, visits, anything that involved Daniel and the medical community. For whatever reason, they seemed to leave dads out, exclude them, turn their chair the other direction from dad, specifically to mom. For whatever reason, we're just kind of left out. And I don't know that it's intentional or not, but it makes it very difficult. First of all, I think a dad's makeup, a man's makeup is different than a woman's. So we deal with things a little bit different. It's hard to ask for help. We don't stop to ask for directions. So why would we ask to have someone help us raise our child? So I saw that, firsthand with Michelle, with her families, listening to her stories of what was going on in a home. So I tried to start a Fathers Network with the help of a couple of the ladies with Family Connection. And like I said before, I offered food, I offered dancing girls. I had everything that would bring dads out to a meeting, and I could not get a dad to come to a meeting. And so this is my second chance. And I was so excited when you called me. And of course, thankful to Rooster for recommending. But this is my second chance to get involved. And so I really, really would love to make an impact. Just one dad, if I can help one dad out in any way, then that would really, really make me happy. So that's where I'm at on that.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I love your heart. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to impact not just one dad, but perhaps many dads, ones that you'll know. And in some cases, maybe just listening to this podcast, it'll be a source of inspiration to somebody that you or I will never know. And that's, I think, the beauty of what we're doing. So I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up.
Can I share a scripture with you?
Absolutely.
I want to read a couple verses from Psalms 139. It goes, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day has passed." All of our kids are special, David, but God doesn't make mistakes. He didn't make a mistake with Daniel. And that scripture tells us that he knew Daniel before time. And Daniel was of value to him. And if he's of value to God, then he's of value to Michelle and I.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Let's give a special shout out to Rooster Rossiter, a mutual friend and founder of Ainsley's Angels, Ainsley's dad for that matter, as well as podcast dad number 29. If somebody wants to learn more about family connections, about Ainsley's Angels, or contact you, what's the best way to do that, Jeff?
Let me give you an email address that's actually Michelle's and mine. That way it'll reach both of us. It's MIC1DAN2@bellsouth.net. And that's MIC for Michael and DAN for Daniel.
I love it. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes as well.
Okay.
Jeff, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Jeff is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Jeff, thanks again.
Thank you very much, David. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.